Why were King Philip IV's daughters-in-law brutally tortured and imprisoned for love affairs in the infamous Tour de Nesle Affair? What unspeakable act did Emperor Nero commit against his own mother, Agrippina the Younger, that left all of Rome in shock? And why did scandalous Roman women like Empress Messalina risk everything, status, safety, even their lives, for their sometimes insane desires? You'll discover these and many other disturbing acts in history in today's video. Before we begin, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, and let's dive into the story of one of the most brutal emperors to ever walk the earth. Imagine, if you will, the city of Rome, a sprawling metropolis of marble and ambition, its very heart beating with the rhythm of empire. Now, picture at its core a young man, barely out of his teens, suddenly thrust onto the most powerful throne in the known world. His name was Nero Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, and his reign, though it began with the promise of a golden age, would descend into a maelstrom of excess, cruelty, and personal depravity that would not only shock his jaded contemporaries, but echo through history as a byword for unchecked power and artistic madness. Nero was but 17 when he ascended to power in 54 AD. For Rome, still reeling from the erratic reign of Claudius, this youth offered a glimmer of hope. He was initially guided by two brilliant minds, Seneca the Younger, a renowned Stoic philosopher, and Sextus Afranius Burrus, the formidable Praetorian prefect. Under their tutelage, the first 5 years of Nero's rule were marked by moderation, justice, and effective administration. A period so praised it became known as the Quinquennium Neronis, the 5 years of Nero. The Senate had more power, the treasury was well managed, and the empire seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. But beneath this veneer of statesmanship, a darker current stirred within Nero, a restless soul yearning for something far beyond the dry machinations of governance. He craved artistic expression, personal freedom, and absolute, unchallengeable control over every facet of his existence. This craving, unbridled by the constraints that bind ordinary men, soon led him down a path of scandalous relationships and increasingly brutal acts. His first wife was Octavia, the gentle and virtuous daughter of Emperor Claudius. Their marriage was a mere political alliance, forged in the cold calculus of dynastic power, utterly devoid of affection. Nero, with his burgeoning artistic temperament and a growing appetite for sensory stimulation, found her too traditional, too unyielding in her virtue. He longed for something more vibrant, more unconventional. His gaze first fell upon Acte, a freedwoman, a former slave of alluring beauty and quiet devotion. This affair, though not a direct political threat, was a profound personal affront to his mother, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was a woman of formidable intellect, unbridled ambition, and ruthless cunning. She saw herself as the true power behind the throne, a co-ruler in all but name, having allegedly poisoned Claudius to ensure Nero's ascension and consolidate her own influence. She believed she owned Nero, body and soul, and his affair with a former slave was an unbearable insult to her imperial authority. Imagine the atmosphere in the imperial palace during these early years: the hushed whispers, the veiled glances, the silent, terrifying power struggle between mother and son. Agrippina, accustomed to dominating every man in her life, tried to reassert control, even threatening to expose Nero's questionable legitimacy. But Nero, chafing under her suffocating influence, began to see her not as a guide, but as a cage. His affair with Acte was a small spark of rebellion, but it was just the beginning of a desperate struggle for autonomy that would end in parricide. As Nero grew bolder, his desires became more extreme, and his methods more ruthless. His next great passion was Poppaea Sabina, a woman of legendary beauty and sharp intellect, but also of immense ambition. Poppaea was married to Otho, a close friend and confidant of Nero. The affair blossomed, and Poppaea, unlike the compliant Acte, actively encouraged Nero to rid himself of Octavia, promising him a freedom and passion his chaste wife could never offer. The pressure mounted. Octavia, innocent and beloved by the Roman people, became an intolerable obstacle. Nero first exiled her, sending her away from the public eye. But this was not enough for Poppaea, nor for Nero's escalating cruelty. Under false accusations of adultery and a fabricated plot, he ordered her execution. The scene was chillingly brutal. Her veins were opened, and when she did not die quickly enough, she was suffocated in a steam bath, her body convulsing in the scalding water. Her head, severed from her body, was then brought to Poppaea as a grotesque trophy. This act, a visceral testament to Nero's growing depravity and his willingness to eliminate anyone who stood in the way of his desires, sent shivers through the Roman aristocracy. The air itself seemed to grow colder in the imperial city, thick with fear and the scent of unspoken horrors. With Octavia gone, Nero married Poppaea. Their union, however, was also marked by tragedy and further depravity. Poppaea died, allegedly from a kick to the stomach by Nero during a fit of rage while she was pregnant. Whether accidental or a deliberate act fueled by his volatile temper, it painted a horrifying picture of an emperor whose passions could turn violent in an instant, even against those he claimed to love. The silence after such an outburst must have been deafening, heavy with regret, or perhaps only fleeting indifference. But Nero's sins extended far beyond his tempestuous personal relationships. His artistic aspirations, initially seen as a charming eccentricity, morphed into a megalomaniacal obsession. He saw himself as a divine artist, a virtuoso singer, a master lyre player, a gifted actor, and even a triumphant charioteer. He would perform for hours on end, forcing senators, distinguished citizens, and common folk alike to attend his lengthy recitals. Imagine the agony of sitting through endless, mediocre performances in a stifling theater, knowing that a single yawn, a moment of inattention, or even a discreet trip to relieve oneself could mean your demise. Guards were posted at the exits, trapping the audience. Women gave birth in the audience rather than risk leaving, and men feigned death to be carried out. The air would be thick with the suffocating scent of expensive incense, meant to mask the underlying fear and boredom, punctuated only by the rhythmic, forced applause of his claque. Hundreds of young men specifically hired and trained to shower him with adulation. Nero, basking in these manufactured ovations, truly believed himself a genius, a new Apollo. His most infamous act of sin and depravity, however, is forever linked to the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. For 6 days and 7 nights, the city became an inferno, consuming homes, temples, and lives. While historians still debate whether Nero actually started the fire, some argue it was accidental, others that he did it for construction space, the rumors were rampant and damning. Legend has it he fiddled while Rome burned, a poetic but anachronistic image, as the fiddle didn't exist then. More accurately, ancient sources claim he ascended to the Palatine Hill, dressed in theatrical costume, and sang an epic poem about the fall of Troy while watching the city ablaze, seemingly inspired by the catastrophic spectacle. What is certain is his response. He callously seized the opportunity to clear vast swathes of land, previously occupied by homes and businesses, to build his opulent Domus Aurea, or quote of Golden House. This sprawling palace complex was a testament to his unchecked ego. Gilded ceilings, walls inlaid with mother-of-pearl and precious stones, revolving dining rooms that sprinkled flowers and perfumes from above, and an artificial lake where Rome's heart once stood. This act, prioritizing personal extravagance and architectural fantasy over the immense suffering of his people, was a profound moral failing, a sin against his very subjects, who cursed his name amidst the ashes. To deflect blame for the devastating fire, Nero famously scapegoated the burgeoning Christian community, initiating the first major persecution against them. Imagine the sheer terror of being a Christian in Rome then, rounded up, subjected to unimaginable torture, crucified, or, most horrifically, set ablaze as human torches to light Nero's gardens at night. The screams of the condemned, the acrid smell of burning flesh, the chilling spectacle of imperial cruelty transforming human beings into macabre lanterns. This was the ultimate expression of Nero's depravity, a sin against humanity itself, born from a desperate need to maintain power and deflect blame. The air in Rome, already heavy with smoke, now reeked of terror and injustice. His later years were a descent into escalating paranoia, purges, and even more bizarre public displays. He eliminated anyone he perceived as a threat, real or imagined. Seneca, his former tutor, was forced to commit suicide. Lucan, the poet, suffered the same fate. Countless senators, distinguished citizens, and military commanders fell victim to his purges. The atmosphere of his court was a viper's nest of intrigue, where a misspoken word, a sigh of impatience, or a perceived slight could lead to a forced suicide, a quiet poisoning, or a sudden, brutal execution. Nero's personal life became increasingly unhinged from Roman norms. After Poppeia's death, he took another wife, Empress Messalina, but his most shocking relationship was with a freedman named Sporus. Sporus bore a striking resemblance to Poppaea, and Nero had him castrated, then dressed him as a woman, marrying him in a public ceremony. He even demanded Sporus address him as husband, and himself be addressed as wife. Later he also married Pythagoras, another enslaved man, in a ceremony where Nero took the role of the bride. These acts, profound transgressions of Roman social and moral norms, were further testaments to his unchecked desires and profound psychological unraveling. Even the Roman elite, accustomed to the excesses of emperors, found these acts beyond the pale. Ultimately, his reign of depravity, terror, and relentless self-indulgence led to widespread rebellion across the provinces. Abandoned by his Praetorian Guard, declared a public enemy by the Senate, a decree that meant death by flogging, Nero fled Rome. In his final desperate moments, hiding in a villa outside the city, he famously dithered, unable to commit suicide himself. It was only when he heard the approaching hoofbeats of the soldiers sent to capture him that he finally forced his loyal secretary, Epaphroditus, to stab him in the throat. With his last breath, he allegedly uttered the poignant, self-absorbed words, "Qualis artifex pereo." What an artist dies in me. Nero's story is a chilling testament to how absolute, unchecked power can unleash the darkest aspects of human nature. His sins, of unbridled lust, callous cruelty, narcissistic vanity, and utter disregard for human life, were not just personal failings, but forces that shaped the destiny of an empire, leaving a legacy of infamy that echoes through the ages. The sensory experience of his reign was one of opulent decay, forced celebration masking deep terror, and the ever-present, unsettling knowledge that one man's desires could dictate the life or death of thousands. He was a creature of paradox, a patron of the arts who destroyed ancient masterpieces, a lover of beauty who embraced unimaginable ugliness, and a ruler who, in his quest for pleasure and artistic glory, brought Rome to the brink of chaos. He was The air in ancient Rome, particularly within the gilded cages of the imperial palace, was thick with ambition, intrigue, and a constant, simmering undercurrent of desire. Into this volatile world stepped Valeria Messalina, a woman whose name, even 2 millennia later, remains synonymous with insatiable lust, ruthless ambition, and a downfall as spectacular as it was inevitable. She was the third wife of Emperor Claudius, a man often portrayed as an awkward, scholarly figure, easily manipulated. But beneath his seemingly docile exterior, a darker, more pragmatic ruler lay, and Messalina would learn this truth in the most brutal way imaginable. Messalina was born into the heart of Roman aristocracy, a great-grandniece of Emperor Augustus himself. Her lineage was impeccable, connecting her to the very foundations of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. From an early age she would have been schooled in the intricate dance of Roman politics and the expectations placed upon women of her station, to be virtuous, to produce heirs, and to support their husbands. Yet Messalina seemed destined to shatter every one of these conventions. Her marriage to Claudius in 39 AD was initially a political convenience. Claudius, older and with a reputation for being somewhat clumsy and easily swayed, was an unlikely emperor. But upon Caligula's assassination he was unexpectedly thrust onto the throne. With him, Messalina, still in her late teens, became empress. Imagine the sudden shift in her world, from a noblewoman to the most powerful woman in Rome, her every whim potentially a command, her every desire a dangerous spark. The palace, with its endless corridors, secret passages, and hushed chambers, became her playground, and the Roman elite, her unwitting pawns. Historians like Tacitus and Suetonius paint a vivid, if often sensationalized, picture of Messalina. They describe her as a woman of breathtaking beauty, with a captivating charm that masked a truly ruthless and predatory nature. But it was her alleged sexual appetite that truly cemented her infamy. The accounts claim she was insatiable, engaging in countless affairs, not out of love, but often for the sheer thrill of transgression, or to exert control, or even as a bizarre form of political maneuvering. One of the most shocking tales, recounted by Pliny the Elder, describes a contest Messalina allegedly held with a famous Roman prostitute. In a single night, she supposedly outlasted the professional, engaging with 25 different men. While the exact number is likely an exaggeration, designed to shock and condemn, the very existence of such a story speaks volumes about her reputation. Imagine the whispers that would have rippled through the city, from the Forum to the farthest reaches of the empire, of an empress who dared to defy every societal expectation of female modesty and fidelity. The air in Rome would have crackled with both scandalized horror and a perverse fascination. But Messalina's sins of the flesh were rarely just about pleasure. They were deeply intertwined with her ambition and her quest for power. She understood that in the treacherous world of imperial Rome, influence was gained not just through bloodlines or political alliances, but through personal connections, favors, and the careful manipulation of those around her. Her lovers were often powerful men, senators, equestrians, even actors. By binding them to her through illicit affairs, she created a network of complicity and loyalty, extending her reach into every corner of the Roman elite. Her ruthlessness was as legendary as her libido. She saw rivals everywhere, especially those who might threaten her children's succession. She bore Claudius 2 children, Octavia and Britannicus. Her targets included prominent senators, wealthy citizens, and even members of the imperial family. She would use her influence over Claudius, often through tears, feigned illness, or cunning persuasion, to convince him of their supposed treason. Many innocent men and women met their end on her whim, accused of conspiracy or adultery, their property confiscated, their lives extinguished with chilling efficiency. Consider the case of Valerius Asiaticus, a wealthy and influential senator. Messalina coveted his magnificent gardens of Lucullus. To acquire them, she accused him of plotting against Claudius, and of adultery with Poppaea Sabina the Elder, the mother of Nero's later wife. Despite Asiaticus's eloquent defense, Claudius was swayed by Messalina and his freedmen. Asiaticus was condemned, though he was granted the mercy of suicide. Imagine the despair of a man of his standing, knowing his fate was sealed by the empress's covetousness, his last breath taken amidst the very gardens she desired. The scent of blooming flowers would have been tainted by the stench of injustice. Another victim was Julia Livilla, Claudius's niece. Messalina, perhaps seeing her as a potential rival for influence or simply disliking her, accused her of adultery with Seneca the Younger, who was subsequently exiled. Julia Livilla herself was later executed. The palace became a place of constant dread, where a misplaced word, a casual friendship, or simply possessing something Messalina desired, could lead to a sudden, terrifying end. The whispers in the corridors were not of love, but of fear. Messalina's downfall, when it came, was as audacious and self-destructive as her life. In 48 AD, while Claudius was away at Ostia, Messalina committed the ultimate transgression. She publicly married her lover, Gaius Silius, a prominent senator. This was not a secret tryst, it was a full, legally binding ceremony, complete with witnesses and a dowry. It was an act of bigamy and, more importantly, treason. Why she did it remains a subject of historical debate. Was it a reckless act of passion, a defiant assertion of her own power, believing Claudius too weak to stop her? Or was it part of a desperate plot with Silius to overthrow Claudius, believing the emperor's health was failing? Whatever her motive, the audacity of the act was staggering. Imagine the scene, the grand villa, the joyous or perhaps terrified guests, the Empress of Rome, already married to the emperor, taking another man as her husband. The air would have been charged with a dangerous, exhilarating madness. News of this outrageous act finally reached Claudius through his powerful freedmen, particularly Narcissus, who had grown weary of Messalina's excesses and feared for his own position. Narcissus, understanding Claudius's slow, ponderous nature, acted swiftly and decisively. He ensured Claudius understood the gravity of the situation, that Messalina was not just committing adultery, but outright treason, threatening the very stability of the empire. Claudius, initially bewildered and seemingly unable to grasp the full extent of her betrayal, was eventually roused to action. He returned to Rome, his mind clouded by confusion and rage. Narcissus, fearing Messalina might regain her influence, took matters into his own hands. He ordered her execution without waiting for Claudius's explicit command. Messalina, abandoned by her lovers and even her own mother, who had tried to flee with her, found herself cornered in the gardens of Lucullus, the very gardens she had murdered Asiaticus to obtain. She was with her mother, Domitia Lepida, who, in a final act of cold pragmatism, urged her daughter to take her own life with a dagger to avoid public humiliation. But Messalina, so accustomed to orchestrating the deaths of others, hesitated. She was perhaps too accustomed to life, too enamored with her own existence, to end it herself. Imagine her final moments, the beautiful gardens, now a trap, the autumn air, perhaps crisp and cool, doing little to soothe her racing heart. The glint of the dagger in her mother's hand, then the sudden, terrifying sight of the approaching centurions. When she faltered, a tribune, seeing her hesitation, plunged his sword into her, ending her infamous life. The silence that followed her death must have been profound, a stark contrast to the clamor of her scandalous life. When Claudius was informed of her death, he showed remarkably little emotion. According to Tacitus, he simply asked for a cup of wine and continued with his dinner, a chilling testament to the emotional detachment, or perhaps the profound relief of a man finally freed from a dangerous, unpredictable force. The Senate, eager to erase her memory, ordered the removal of her statues and the erasure of her name from public monuments, a practice known as damnatio memoriae. Valeria Messalina's legacy is one of unbridled passion and ruthless ambition, a cautionary tale etched into the very stones of Rome. Her life, a whirlwind of sex, sin, and power, serves as a stark reminder of how easily the pursuit of pleasure and control could descend into a terrifying abyss of depravity and destruction in the ancient world. She was a woman who dared to live beyond the confines of her time, pushing boundaries until they snapped, ultimately consuming her in their wake. Her story is a haunting whisper of the dangers that lurk when desire knows no master, and power becomes its only god. Now, let's move on to another fascinating woman, Julia the Elder, the rebellious daughter of Augustus. The Roman Empire, under its first emperor Augustus, was a meticulously crafted facade of order, virtue, and restoration. After decades of civil war, Augustus sought to rebuild not just the infrastructure of Rome, but its very moral fabric. He championed traditional Roman values, piety, frugality, and above all, familia, the sanctity of the family unit, embodied by a virtuous wife and dutiful children. Yet at the very heart of this idealized imperial family stood a woman who would spectacularly defy every one of her father's carefully constructed principles, Julia the Elder, his only biological child. Her life, a glittering cage of duty and expectation, became a poignant testament to the crushing weight of imperial destiny, and her sins, a scandalous whisper that echoed through the marble halls of power. Julia was born in 39 BC, the daughter of Octavian, who would soon become Augustus, and his second wife, Scribonia. Her early life was shaped by her father's relentless ambition. When she was barely more than a toddler, Augustus divorced Scribonia on the very day Julia was born, to marry Livia Drusilla, a woman of immense political acumen but who never bore him a child. This early separation from her birth mother set the tone for Julia's life. She was a pawn, a living symbol of dynastic continuity, her personal happiness always secondary to her father's grand design for Rome. Augustus, in his fervent drive for moral reform, subjected Julia to an upbringing of almost puritanical strictness. He oversaw her education personally, ensuring she was trained in traditional womanly arts, spinning and weaving, and that she was kept far from any hint of scandal. Her companions were carefully chosen, her every movement monitored. She was forbidden from engaging in frivolous activities, even to speak with strangers without her father's permission. Imagine the stifling air within the imperial household, where every smile, every gesture, every whisper was scrutinized. For a young woman of sharp intellect and, as it would turn out, a passionate nature, this would have felt like living under a microscope, the expectations of an entire empire resting squarely on her delicate shoulders. Her life became a series of dynastic marriages, each meticulously planned by Augustus to secure the succession and strengthen his nascent empire. At 14, she was married to her cousin, Marcus Claudius Marcellus, Augustus's chosen heir and a promising young man. This would have been a period of hope, perhaps even genuine affection, but their union was tragically short-lived. Marcellus died prematurely in 23 BC, plunging Julia into widowhood at a tender age and leaving Augustus's succession plans in disarray. The scent of funeral pyres and the heavy mantle of grief would have settled upon her young shoulders, a foretaste of the sorrows to come. Augustus, ever the pragmatist, quickly arranged her second marriage in 21 BC to his loyal general, Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa. Agrippa was a man almost 2 decades her senior, a battle-hardened veteran of humble origins, but utterly indispensable to Augustus. This marriage was a stark contrast to her youthful union with Marcellus. While Agrippa was a steadfast and powerful figure, providing stability and security, it was not a love match. Julia's duty was to produce heirs, and she performed it spectacularly, bearing him 5 children in quick succession: Gaius Caesar, Julia the Younger, Lucius Caesar, Agrippina the Elder, mother of Caligula, grandmother of Nero, and Agrippa Posthumus. She became the mother of future emperors, her womb a veritable factory of imperial heirs. Yet beneath this facade of dutiful procreation and public rectitude, a restless spirit simmered within Julia. Agrippa's death in 12 BC once again left her a widow. And again Augustus, driven by dynastic necessity, remarried her. This time to Tiberius, his stepson from Livia, and a man she reportedly despised. Their marriage was a disaster from the outset, marked by mutual antipathy. Tiberius, a man of rigid character and little charm, found Julia's vivacity and sharp wit irritating, while she found him austere and joyless. Imagine the cold, silent tension that would have filled their shared chambers. 2 souls utterly incompatible, bound together by the iron will of the emperor. The air between them, thick with resentment, would have been suffocating. It was in this atmosphere of unfulfilled desire and constrained existence that Julia's alleged sins began to flourish. Accounts from later historians, often hostile to her memory, paint a picture of rampant promiscuity. She was accused of engaging in numerous affairs with prominent Roman nobles, often in the very forum, or on the rostra, sacred public spaces, turning her supposed transgressions into brazen acts of rebellion. The whispered stories, later written down by Roman authors like Suetonius and Tacitus, claimed she frequented lavish banquets, engaged in wild revelries, and sought out illicit lovers with a desperate appetite for pleasure. Why did she do it? Was it pure hedonism, a defiant rebellion against her father's suffocating control and his hypocritical moral laws, the Lex Julia de Adulterius Coercendus he himself had instituted, which criminalized adultery? Was it a search for genuine affection or passion absent in her politically dictated marriages? Or perhaps, as some suggest, a calculated form of subtle political maneuvering, building her own network of alliances outside her father's direct gaze? Whatever the motivation, her actions were a profound affront to Augustus, who had so painstakingly cultivated an image of austere virtue for his imperial family and for Rome itself. The very public nature of her alleged affairs, contrasted with Augustus's constant lectures on virtus and gravitas, created a chasm of hypocrisy that threatened to undermine his entire moral crusade. Imagine the tension building over years, the clandestine meetings, the nervous glances exchanged, the servants' whispers carrying tales through the palace, inevitably reaching the ears of Augustus's network of informants. The air would be heavy with unspoken judgment, laced with the sweet, dangerous scent of forbidden pleasure. For Augustus, who valued public perception and moral authority above all else, Julia's behavior was not merely a personal disappointment, it was a devastating political embarrassment. She was his living legacy, and her actions threatened to unravel everything he had built. The blow fell in 2 BC. Augustus, having finally received irrefutable evidence of her behavior, possibly orchestrated by Livia, his wife, who harbored no love for Julia's branch of the family, was utterly devastated. He was reportedly so ashamed and enraged that he withdrew from public life for a time, even contemplating her execution. Instead, he chose exile. Julia was banished to Pandateria, modern-day Ventotene, a tiny, desolate volcanic island off the coast of Campania. Imagine the sudden, brutal transition. From the opulent, bustling heart of the Roman Empire, surrounded by luxuries and attendants, to a remote, wind-swept rock. The silence, broken only by the crashing waves and the cries of seabirds, would have been deafening. She was stripped of all her comforts, forbidden from drinking wine, forbidden from wearing luxurious attire, and allowed no male visitors unless personally approved by Augustus. Only her mother, Scribonia, who chose to accompany her in exile, and a few trusted slaves remained. The psychological impact must have been immense. A woman of vibrant intellect and social grace, trapped in a stark, isolated prison, her life's purpose utterly nullified. The sea air, once perhaps a symbol of freedom, now reeked of confinement and disgrace. Her life in exile was one of relentless isolation and profound hardship. The island was barren, lacking fresh water, making even basic survival a challenge. Every luxury, every comfort she had known, was cruelly stripped away. The years dragged on, each one a testament to Augustus's unforgiving nature and the unwavering power of his moralistic agenda. Even after Augustus's death in 14 AD, her suffering continued. Tiberius, her despised former husband who now held the imperial power, had no compassion for her. He maintained her exile, and some accounts suggest he even cut off her allowance, condemning her to a slow starvation. Julia the Elder died in 14 AD, the same year as Augustus, though some historians suggest her death occurred shortly after, possibly from starvation or profound despair, hastened by Tiberius's cruelty. Her life, intended as a beacon of imperial virtue, became instead a tragic testament to the impossible pressures placed upon women in positions of power, and the devastating consequences of defying the rigid moral codes of an age. Her legacy remains complex. Was she a victim, a rebellious spirit crushed by an unfeeling father and an unforgiving system? Or was she a hedonistic transgressor who brought her fate upon herself? Perhaps she was both. A woman of fiery passion trapped by circumstance, whose refusal to conform to a pre-written script led her down a path of scandal and, ultimately, profound tragedy. Her story, whispered across the centuries, serves as a haunting reminder of the suffocating grip of duty and the desperate lengths to which a spirit might go to reclaim a semblance of personal freedom, even if it meant a life of sin and a lonely, desolate end. And now, another fascinating Roman woman, Agrippina the Younger, the cunning and ruthless mother of Emperor Nero. Imagine the very lineage of emperors running through your veins, a powerful, almost intoxicating current. Such was the destiny of Agrippina the Younger, a woman born with the glitter of imperial gold in her eyes, and an unyielding will to claim the power she believed was her birthright. Granddaughter of Augustus, great-granddaughter of Livia, and daughter of the revered Germanicus, the beloved Roman general, Agrippina was no ordinary noblewoman. She was a woman of extraordinary intellect, breathtaking beauty, and a ruthless ambition that would not only reshape the imperial family, but would forever intertwine her fate with the infamous reign of her son, Nero. Born into the heart of the Julio-Claudian dynasty in 15 AD, Agrippina's early life was a tumultuous education in the brutal realities of Roman politics. She saw firsthand how swiftly power could shift and how cruelly it could be wielded. Her father, Germanicus, a military hero adored by the populace, died under mysterious circumstances, widely rumored to have been poisoned. This early tragedy would instill in Agrippina a deep-seated paranoia and a relentless drive for security and control. She learned early that in Rome, only the ruthless survived. Her first brush with imperial depravity came under the reign of her brother, Emperor Caligula. Caligula, known for his capricious cruelty and alleged incestuous relations with his sisters, initially favored Agrippina and her two sisters, Drusilla and Livilla, granting them unprecedented honors. But Caligula's favor was a fleeting, dangerous thing. After the death of Drusilla, his favorite, his madness escalated. Agrippina, with her defiant spirit and a gaze that hinted at her own formidable will, was soon seen as a threat. She and Livilla were implicated in a conspiracy against him, likely a genuine attempt to end his tyranny. The consequence was harsh: banishment to the Pontine Islands. Imagine the bitter salt spray on her face, the lonely confinement on a desolate island, stripped of her imperial status, her wealth, her freedom. This exile was not merely a punishment, it was a crucible. It hardened her resolve, sharpening her political acumen and fueling an insatiable hunger to regain her lost standing. She would have watched from afar, perhaps, as Caligula was finally assassinated, and her uncle, Claudius, the awkward, scholarly, seemingly pliable intellectual of the family, was unexpectedly thrust onto the throne. Agrippina saw her chance. Upon her return from exile during Claudius's reign, Agrippina wasted no time. Her first marriage had given her a son, Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, later known as Nero. In this child, Agrippina saw her ultimate path to power. But Claudius already had an heir, his own son, Britannicus, from his recently executed and notoriously scandalous wife Messalina. To place Nero on the throne, Agrippina had to become empress. Her pursuit of Claudius was a masterful display of calculated seduction and political maneuvering. Claudius was lonely, having just rid himself of the treacherous Messalina. Agrippina was beautiful, intelligent, and a direct descendant of Augustus, lending immense prestige. The biggest hurdle was Roman law, which forbade marriage between uncle and niece. But Agrippina was relentless. She lobbied, persuaded, and used her influence to have the law changed, overcoming the protests of even Seneca, who found the idea of such an incestuous union abhorrent. The Senate, eager to curry favor with the powerful woman, acquiesced. In 49 AD, Agrippina married her uncle, Emperor Claudius. Her ascent as empress was swift and absolute. Unlike Messalina, who focused on illicit pleasures, Agrippina understood the true levers of power. She meticulously dismantled the influence of Claudius's powerful Greek freedmen, who had effectively run the empire. She brought her own trusted advisors into the palace, consolidating her control over the imperial household, the treasury, and even military appointments. Imagine the palace, once bustling with the whispers of freedmen, now under her stern, watchful eye. The scent of fear, once associated with Messalina's unpredictable whims, now carried the cold, calculating precision of Agrippina's ambition. Her ultimate goal was the succession of her son Nero over Claudius's biological son Britannicus. She moved with chilling determination. First, she arranged Nero's adoption by Claudius, a colossal step that placed him directly in line for the throne. Then, she ensured Nero was presented to the public, tutored by Seneca, and married to Octavia, Claudius's daughter, further cementing his dynastic claim. Britannicus, Claudius's true son, was systematically undermined, kept in the shadows, his education neglected, his public appearances curtailed. Agrippina used every opportunity to highlight Nero's maturity and suitability, compared to Britannicus, who was still a young boy. The air around Britannicus would have grown steadily colder, thick with an unspoken dread. The final act of her relentless ambition involved the death of Claudius himself. In 54 AD, after just 5 years as empress, Claudius fell ill and died. While natural causes were cited, the prevailing whisper of history, and indeed the strong belief of many ancient sources, points to Agrippina's hand. Claudius had allegedly begun to express regret over Nero's adoption, and hinted at restoring Britannicus to his rightful place. Agrippina could not risk this. The stakes were too high. The accounts of Claudius's alleged poisoning are chillingly detailed. Agrippina reportedly enlisted the help of Locusta, Rome's most infamous female poisoner, and a trusted eunuch, Halotus, or perhaps Claudius's own taster, Xenophon. The poison, supposedly a fast-acting and undetectable one, was administered in a dish of his favorite mushrooms. Imagine the setting: a lavish imperial banquet, rich aromas filling the air, the clinking of goblets, the murmur of conversation. Claudius, unsuspecting, partakes of his meal. The mushroom, meant to deliver a quick death, causes him immense pain and violent vomiting, but does not kill him instantly. Agrippina, ever the pragmatist, could not afford for him to recover or to expose her. She allegedly ordered the court physician, Gaius Stertinius Xenophon, to force a poisoned feather down Claudius's throat, under the guise of inducing further vomiting, thereby delivering the final, fatal dose. The emperor, a man who had survived many assassination attempts, finally succumbed. The moment Claudius's last breath left him, Agrippina's intricate plan sprang into action. She meticulously ensured that Nero's ascension was immediate and uncontested. While others mourned, or pretended to, she was moving pieces on a chessboard, ensuring Nero was proclaimed emperor before news of Claudius's death could even truly spread, or before any supporters of Britannicus could rally. The cold silence of death in the palace was quickly replaced by the murmurs of acclamation for the new, young emperor. For the first few years of Nero's reign, the Quinquennium Neronis, Agrippina effectively ruled through her son. She attended Senate meetings, hidden behind a curtain but making her presence known. She received foreign envoys alongside Nero, a stark breach of Roman tradition for a woman. Coins were minted depicting her alongside Nero, sometimes even facing him, an unprecedented symbol of co-rulership. Her portrait was often displayed more prominently than his. She controlled the imperial purse strings, orchestrated political appointments, and demanded utter deference. Imagine the young Nero still finding his feet, constantly under the watchful, demanding gaze of his mother, a woman who rarely let him out of her sight. The air around him, once perhaps smelling of boyish freedom, now carried the heavy scent of his mother's overbearing control. But Nero, with his blossoming artistic temperament and growing desire for personal freedom, soon chafed under his mother's suffocating influence. He began to assert himself, encouraged by Seneca and Burrus, who understood that their own power depended on Nero's independence from Agrippina. The clash between mother and son became inevitable, a silent war of wills that escalated with terrifying speed. Nero began to push back. His affair with the freed woman Acte was a direct defiance of Agrippina, who desired a more politically advantageous match. When Agrippina confronted him, clinging to her former authority, Nero's resentment boiled over. She threatened to reveal Nero's supposed illegitimacy, to restore Britannicus to his rightful place. But Britannicus conveniently died of an alleged seizure during a banquet, an illness suspiciously timed, and widely believed to be another of Nero's early poisonings, orchestrated perhaps by Locusta once more, with Agrippina's tacit approval, or at least her immediate benefit. Even this, however, did not fully satisfy Nero's desire to be free of his mother. Nero's efforts to remove Agrippina became increasingly desperate and bizarre. The first attempt involved a poisoned dish. Agrippina, however, had likely cultivated an immunity to poisons over the years, a common practice among powerful Romans. The attempt failed, her constitution proving too strong. Imagine her cold, knowing gaze across the table, understanding her son's lethal intent, yet outwardly showing nothing. The food would have tasted like ash. Driven to distraction, Nero then conceived of an elaborate, horrifying plan, a collapsible boat. In 59 AD, he invited Agrippina to a reconciliation banquet at Baiae, a beautiful coastal resort. The evening was spent in feigned warmth, the air filled with forced smiles and polite conversation. As Agrippina sailed back to her villa that night, the specially constructed vessel was designed to break apart. Imagine the serene moonlit sea, the gentle rocking of the boat, and then the sudden, sickening lurch as the weighted lead roof collapsed, followed by the shattering of the hull. Chaos, screams, the cold shock of the seawater engulfing her. But Agrippina was a survivor. Despite being injured by falling debris, she swam to shore, guided by the dim lights of fishing boats. Her companions perished. Reaching the beach, drenched and shaken but alive, she sent a messenger to Nero, calmly informing him of her miraculous escape. Imagine Nero receiving that message in the dead of night, the blood draining from his face, the realization that his grand, theatrical murder plot had failed, and his formidable mother was still alive. The air in his chamber would have been thick with panic and frustrated rage. Agrippina's defiance, her refusal to back down, her clinging to her imperial privilege and status, only solidified Nero's determination. He knew he could not truly rule while she lived. This time, there would be no subtlety, no elaborate schemes. He dispatched his praetorian prefect, Anicetus, and a group of soldiers to her villa. Imagine her final moments, the dark, quiet night at her villa, a sudden banging at the doors, the terrified servants, the heavy tread of soldiers. As they burst into her chamber, Agrippina, seeing her fate, bravely bared her abdomen, and famously cried out, "Strike here for this born Nero!" With a final brutal thrust, the soldiers stabbed her repeatedly, ending the life of one of Rome's most formidable and ruthless women. The scent of blood would have mingled with the lingering perfume of her life, a final, visceral testament to her enduring power, and the tragic irony of her death, at the hands of the son she had elevated to such dizzying heights. Agrippina the Younger's legacy is fiercely debated. Was she a ruthless monster, consumed by ambition, who got what she deserved? Or was she a fiercely intelligent woman, a survivor in a brutal patriarchal world, who played the game of power by its own violent rules, daring to seek and hold authority in an age where women were expected to be subservient? She was both a protector of her son and his ultimate victim, a figure whose sins of ambition and manipulation paved the way for an infamous reign that would haunt Rome for decades. Her story is a chilling reminder of how tightly interwoven sex, sin, and poison were in the fabric of imperial Rome, and how the pursuit of absolute power could transform a mother's love into a deadly, unforgettable tragedy. Now, close your eyes if you will, and let your mind drift back, far past the marble grandeur of Rome, further still than the philosophical groves of Greece. We are heading to a land steeped in millennia of mystery, where the very air hums with ancient power, and the scorching sun beats down on colossal stone monuments. This is ancient Egypt, a civilization unlike any other, built on a foundation of divine kingship, an intricate pantheon of gods, and beliefs that to our modern sensibilities might seem utterly perplexing. even shocking. For in this land of pyramids and papyrus, the most profound sin of many cultures, incest, was, for its rulers, not merely tolerated, but embraced as a sacred duty, a divine imitation, and the ultimate expression of power. The pharaoh was not simply a king, he was a living god, the earthly embodiment of Horus, the divine son of Osiris and Isis. He was the vital link between the human realm and the cosmic order, responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the fundamental principles of truth, balance, order, and justice that governed the universe. His very existence was seen as essential for the annual flooding of the Nile, the fertility of the land, and the prosperity of the two lands. Such a unique being, so intimately connected to the divine, could not marry just anyone. His bloodline was considered literally sacred, infused with divine essence, and to dilute it with ordinary mortal blood would be to diminish his godhood, to threaten Ma'at itself. This, then, was the primary, most profound justification for royal incest, the imitation of the gods. The Egyptian pantheon was replete with divine sibling marriages. Osiris, the god of the afterlife, married his sister Isis, the goddess of magic and motherhood. Their union, fruitful and powerful, gave birth to Horus, the rightful king. Geb, the earth god, married his sister Nut, the sky goddess. Shu, the air, married Tefnut, moisture. This was the cosmic blueprint, the divine order from which all creation sprang. If the gods themselves married their siblings to maintain their purity and produce divine offspring, then the living god on earth, the pharaoh, must do the same. By marrying his sister, or even his daughter, the pharaoh mirrored the divine pattern, reinforcing his own godhead and ensuring the purity of his sacred lineage. The act was not seen as a transgression, but as a reaffirmation of the very fabric of existence, a sacred ritual to preserve cosmic harmony. Imagine the atmosphere in a grand temple, the heavy scent of burning incense, the chanting of priests, the shimmering gold of divine regalia, reflecting the light. Here the pharaoh and his royal sibling wife would participate in rituals, their union, a living embodiment of the divine pairs. The crowds, awestruck, would witness this earthly reflection of their most revered deities, strengthening their faith in the pharaoh's absolute, God-given authority. While the exact prevalence and interpretation of royal incest evolved over Egypt's long history, its most prominent and well-documented manifestations occurred during the powerful dynasties of the New Kingdom, circa 1550 to 1070 BC, and later, under the Ptolemaic dynasty, 305–30 BC, which, while Greek in origin, adopted this tradition to legitimize their rule in the eyes of the native Egyptians. In the New Kingdom, the title of Great Royal Wife, the principal queen, did not always have to be held by a literal sibling, but it was a favored and highly prestigious choice, especially for the sons of a pharaoh who wanted to elevate their wives. Let's trace some fascinating examples that really bring this practice to life. Take Amenhotep I, for instance. He was the second pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, reigning around 1525 to 1504 BC. He married his sister, Amos-e-Meritamun, and she was granted this incredibly powerful title, God's wife of Amun. Now this was an early, clear sign of just how much the queen's religious and political role was strengthening right alongside her pharaoh brother. Then came his successor, Thutmose I, who reigned from about 1504 to 1492 BC. He too married his full sister Ahmose. And from their union came Hatshepsut, a woman who would later demonstrate the immense power of royal women by becoming one of Egypt's most successful female pharaohs herself. Truly remarkable. Moving on, we have Thutmose II, from approximately 1492 to 1479 BC. He married his half-sister, the formidable Hatshepsut. Their marriage truly secured her position as great royal wife, which was a crucial stepping stone for her later ascent to co-regent, and then, as we just mentioned, full pharaoh, ruling completely in her own right. And even Thutmose III, Hatshepsut's stepson, who eventually became a truly great warrior pharaoh around 1479 to 1425 BC, he married his half-sister, Meritre Hatshepsut. It really just solidified this pattern, didn't it? However, the practice took an even more startling turn with the marriage of pharaohs to their own daughters. Amenhotep III, known for his lavish reign and monumental building projects, married his own daughter Sitamun, alongside his principal and much beloved great royal wife Tiye. While Tiye remained the dominant queen, Sitamun held the title of great royal wife, indicating a full royal marriage, not just an honorary title. Imagine the power dynamics within that royal household. A principal queen, revered and influential, yet the pharaoh also formally married to his own child, a living embodiment of the divine incest of the gods. His son Akhenaten, the revolutionary pharaoh who attempted to impose a monotheistic worship of the Aten, continued this pattern, while his primary wife was the famously beautiful Nefertiti, who was likely his sister, though this is debated by scholars, based on some interpretations of their parentage. Artistic depictions suggest he also married at least one of his own daughters. Reliefs show him with his many daughters by Nefertiti, and there is evidence that his third daughter, Ankhesenpatun, who would later become Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's wife, may have been married to him as a great royal wife. Whether this was consummated or purely symbolic for religious purposes is debated, but the ritualistic marriage itself underscores the theological importance of the practice. Tutankhamun, the boy pharaoh whose tomb astonished the modern world, was himself the product of an incestuous union. Recent DNA evidence suggests he was the son of Akhenaten and one of Akhenaten's sisters, whose mummy, the younger lady, was found in the Valley of the Kings. Tutankhamun then married his half-sister, Ankhesenamun, the same daughter of Akhenaten mentioned above. Imagine the weight of this double incestuous lineage, generation after generation, a desperate attempt to preserve the divine essence through repeated inbreeding. The echoing silence of their grand tombs, discovered millennia later, now reveal not just untold treasures, but the intimate, complex, and potentially tragic consequences of such unions. The shimmering gold of their divine regalia, so potent in its symbolism, now holds a silent testimony to a unique worldview. Perhaps the most prolific practitioner of royal incest in the New Kingdom was Ramesses II, often called Ramesses the Great. He had an enormous family, and, beyond his beloved principal queen Nefertari, he took several of his own daughters as great royal wives, including Bintenath and Meritamen. Imagine the scale of his court, filled with his hundreds of children and grandchildren, where daughters were elevated to the status of primary consorts, sitting alongside their mother, the principal queen, in a complex web of divine and familial relationships. This was not a secret sin, but a public display of his overwhelming power and godhood, fulfilling the divine mandate. The practice found an even more prominent and rigid expression under the Ptolemaic dynasty, which ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's conquest. These were not native Egyptians but Macedonian Greeks, and they initially practiced the Greek custom of not marrying siblings. However, to legitimize their rule in the eyes of the native Egyptian population and to mimic the pharaohs they had supplanted, they quickly adopted sibling marriage. This became a hallmark of their dynasty, a bizarre fusion of Greek dynastic purity, where royal siblings married to keep wealth and power within the family, and Egyptian divine tradition. Ptolemy II Philadelphus, the second Ptolemaic king, famously married his full sister, Arsinoe II. This was an unprecedented act in the Greek world, shocking to outside observers, but it solidified their divine status in Egypt. Their epithet, Philadelphus, meaning sibling-loving, celebrated this union. This became the norm for virtually every subsequent Ptolemaic ruler, from Ptolemy III to the very last most famous queen, Cleopatra VII. She married both of her younger brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, in succession, as was required by Egyptian tradition for her to rule as pharaoh. Her unions with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, while politically motivated, were also acts of defiance against this tradition, as she sought to elevate her Roman lovers and their children above her own Ptolemaic siblings. The political and sexual intrigue that swirled around Cleopatra was the culmination of centuries of these traditions, revealing how deeply personal and dynastic choices intertwined with the fate of nations. The scent of her infamous perfumes would have mingled with the lingering tension of her incestuous marriages. Now, let us turn to the sinful duality, modern perspective versus ancient reality. To us, steeped in Abrahamic traditions and modern scientific understanding, incest is a profound taboo, almost universally condemned across cultures. It carries strong moral, social, and psychological prohibitions, viewed as a grave sin and a destructive act. Our understanding of genetics further reinforces this, highlighting the increased risk of recessive genetic disorders and deformities. For the ancient Egyptians, however, within the specific context of royalty, the view could not have been more different. It was not a sin in their moral framework, but a sacred duty, an affirmation of divinity. For commoners, sibling marriage was rare, likely frowned upon, and certainly not religiously sanctioned. This distinction is crucial. The pharaoh was unique, standing apart from humanity, and therefore his actions were judged by a different, divine standard. The very act that would be a transgression for a commoner was a necessary sacred act for the king. There was no internal conflict, no moral ambiguity for them. It was simply how divine kingship functioned. However, despite the divine justification, the biological consequences of repeated incestuous unions are inescapable, even if not understood by the ancients. While the Egyptians didn't grasp the principles of genetics, the scientific reality of increased homozygosity means that harmful recessive genes are more likely to express themselves. Looking at the skeletal remains and mummies of the pharaohs, while definitive conclusions are often difficult due to the complex nature of ancient diseases and the limitations of preservation, some patterns emerge. Tutankhamun, for instance, has been identified through DNA studies as the son of an incestuous union, and himself married his half-sister. Examination of his mummy and genetic analysis suggest he suffered from multiple debilitating conditions, a congenital bone disorder, possibly Kola disease II, scoliosis, a clubfoot, and potentially malaria. While not all of these can be definitively attributed to inbreeding, the increased prevalence of such conditions within highly inbred lines is well established in modern science. One can only imagine the personal suffering, the physical pain that must have plagued the boy king, hidden beneath layers of shimmering gold and divine ceremony. Did this continuous inbreeding weaken the dynasties? The answer is nuanced. The New Kingdom, despite its royal incest, was one of Egypt's most powerful and long-lasting periods. Many pharaohs who engaged in these unions were strong, effective rulers. The Ptolemaic dynasty, while famously incestuous, also endured for nearly 3 centuries. The ultimate fall of these dynasties was due to a complex interplay of political, economic, and external pressures, not solely, or even primarily, genetic decay. However, it's certainly plausible that the genetic weaknesses might have made some rulers more vulnerable to illness or early death, potentially adding another layer of challenge to an already precarious existence. As we bring this segment to a close, let the echoes of these ancient practices resonate within you. The intense desert sun beating down on stone monuments that have witnessed millennia of these unique royal unions. The echoing silence of grand tombs, filled with untold secrets, where pharaohs lay, often alongside their royal siblings or daughters, in eternal rest. The shimmering gold of divine regalia, reflecting not just earthly power, but a profound belief in a sacred bloodline, preserved at any cost. Ancient Egyptian royal incest stands as a powerful testament to the profound cultural differences that exist across time and space. What was to them a sacred duty, a necessary act to maintain the cosmic order and the purity of their living god-kings, is to us a deeply disturbing sin, with clear biological consequences. It reminds us that humanity's search for power, purity, and divine connection has taken paths both awe-inspiring and, by our current reckoning, utterly chilling. The story of royal incest is a quiet whisper from a time when the heavens touched the earth, and the boundaries of family blurred into the infinite. And now, we'll move into a completely different world, the world of ancient Greece. Imagine Athens, a city bathed in the golden light of the 5th century BC, a true marvel of the ancient world. The scent of olive groves mingles with the dust from the Acropolis, where the Parthenon, gleaming white and majestic, asserts humanity's triumph and devotion. Down in the Agora, the heart of the city, the air crackles with the lively debates of democracy, the fervent speeches of politicians, the murmur of philosophers, and the eager chatter of merchants. This was the Golden Age, a beacon of intellectual freedom, artistic brilliance, and nascent democracy. Yet for all its enlightened ideals, Athenian society was rigidly patriarchal, its citizen women largely confined to the shadows of the home. It is into this world of stark contrasts that we introduce a woman who defied every convention, whose intellect shone brighter than any jewel, and whose very existence became a scandalous paradox, Aspasia of Miletus. To understand Aspasia, we must first understand the strictures that bound Athenian women. For a freeborn citizen woman, gynaikon, life was lived almost entirely within the confines of the oikos, the household. Her world revolved around managing servants, weaving textiles, raising children, and maintaining the family's honor through her domestic virtue, and, crucially, her silence. She had no legal rights, no political voice, could not own property, and rarely appeared in public unescorted. Her role was to provide legitimate heirs, and her chastity was paramount. To be seen, to be heard, to engage in public discourse was, for a respectable Athenian woman, an unthinkable transgression, a mark of ill repute. But Athens was also a bustling hub of trade and ideas, attracting people from across the Hellenic world. Among these were the metics, resident foreigners, who, though they lacked citizenship rights, often enjoyed greater personal freedoms and opportunities than their Athenian female counterparts. Many metics found roles in commerce, crafts, or, for women, in professions considered unsuitable for citizen wives. And then, there were the hetairai. The term, often translated simply as courtesan or prostitute, does not fully capture their unique and complex position in Athenian society. Unlike the pornai, common prostitutes, hetairai were distinguished by their education, independence, and their involvement in the intellectual and social life of the city. They were companions, skilled conversationalists, musicians, and dancers. They often owned their own property, managed their own finances, and moved freely in public, attending symposia, all-male drinking parties where intellectual discussion was paramount, and engaging with the leading thinkers of their day. They were the only women, aside from priestesses, permitted to interact with Athenian men on an intellectual level. While sexual availability was often part of their profession, it was secondary to their cultivated minds and engaging personalities. It was within this unique liminal space that Aspasia would carve out her extraordinary influence. Aspasia was born in Miletus, an Ionian Greek city known for its vibrant intellectual and philosophical traditions, where women, relative to Athens, enjoyed greater social and intellectual freedom. It's likely she received an excellent education in rhetoric, philosophy, and sophisticated conversation, skills that would have been largely denied to even the wealthiest Athenian citizen woman. She arrived in Athens as a metic, her keen mind and compelling eloquence quickly setting her apart. The precise date of her arrival is unknown, but by the mid-5th century BC, she had captivated the attention of Athens' most powerful man, Pericles. Pericles was the undisputed leader of Athenian democracy, a brilliant orator, a shrewd strategist, and the driving force behind the city's magnificent cultural and architectural flourishing. He was married to a respectable Athenian woman, with whom he had 2 sons, but their relationship, typical of the time, would have been one of domestic duty rather than intellectual partnership. Then, he met Aspasia. What began as a relationship soon blossomed into a profound, undeniable love, an intellectual and emotional bond that astonished and scandalized Athens. Pericles was so devoted to Aspasia that he divorced his citizen wife to live with her. This was a radical act. As a metic, Aspasia could not legally marry an Athenian citizen, so their union was a form of common law marriage, effectively defying the very laws Pericles championed. Imagine the whispers, the raised eyebrows in the agora, as Pericles, the very embodiment of Athenian statesmanship, would publicly greet Aspasia with a kiss whenever he left or returned home, a display of affection unheard of for a man of his standing in public view. The air around them would have been thick with judgment, fascination, and perhaps a hint of grudging admiration for their brazen unconventionality. What was it about Aspasia that captivated the towering intellect of Pericles and so many other leading figures of Athens? It was her mind. Her home in Athens became a vibrant intellectual salon, a magnetic center where the brightest minds of the age gathered. Thinkers like Anaxagoras, the great pre-Socratic philosopher, the playwright Euripides, the historian Herodotus, and even the revered Socrates, were regular attendees. Imagine the scene, the soft light of evening gatherings, illuminating faces engaged in lively, passionate discourse. The scent of olive oil lamps, the clinking of wine cups, the murmur of conversation rising and falling as ideas flowed freely and boundaries were challenged. Aspasia was not merely a hostess, she was a participant, an equal. Accounts suggest her rhetorical skills were legendary. She could engage in complex philosophical debates, dissect political arguments with surgical precision, and articulate her own views with compelling eloquence. Plato, in his dialogue Menexenus, ironically attributes the authorship of Pericles' famous funeral oration to Aspasia, a powerful, if satirical, nod to her legendary rhetorical prowess and profound influence over him. While this is likely an exaggeration, it vividly illustrates the belief that Aspasia was not just Pericles' mistress, but his intellectual partner, his muse, and even his speechwriter, roles unthinkable for any other woman of the era. The very idea of a woman shaping the rhetoric of the leading democrat of Athens, guiding the words that would define Athenian ideals, would have been revolutionary, almost blasphemous, to many traditionalists. Even Socrates, arguably the greatest philosopher of his time, sought out Aspasia. Plato and Xenophon both mention Socrates' admiration for her wisdom. Socrates himself, renowned for his dialectical method, reportedly learned from her, and even recommended his students to her, suggesting she could teach them the art of rhetoric and persuasion. This is perhaps the greatest testament to her intellectual standing, elevating her far beyond the sphere of mere physical companionship. Imagine Socrates with his famously disheveled appearance, sitting intently at her feet, absorbing her wisdom, engaging in lively debates that stretched late into the night, the air filled with the scent of olive groves wafting in from the open windows, and the sheer exhilaration of intellectual discovery. Aspasia's influence extended beyond the elite circle. She was also said to have run a school for other hetairai, teaching them not just the arts of pleasing men, but the intellectual skills, rhetoric, philosophy, and cultured conversation that elevated them above common prostitutes. She was, in essence, a mentor. empowering a select group of women to gain a degree of independence and agency in a society that afforded them very little. This school itself would have been a controversial institution, viewed by traditionalists as a place of moral decay, but for the women who attended, it was a gateway to intellectual and financial freedom. However, Aspasia's unique position, her profound influence, and her unconventional lifestyle inevitably drew fierce criticism and outright hostility. For Athenian society, steeped in its rigid patriarchal norms, her very existence was a challenge, a dangerous anomaly. She was a foreign woman who spoke publicly, engaged intellectually with men as equals, and was sexually unbound. This was profoundly threatening to the established order, particularly to the traditional roles of citizen wives. The sinful label was not just about her sexual freedom, it was about her audacity to transgress every social boundary placed upon women. Her relationship with Pericles made her an irresistible target for his political enemies. Unable to directly attack the popular Pericles, they aimed their venom at his closest and most vulnerable associate, Aspasia. The Athenian comic playwrights, in particular, seized upon her as a subject of ridicule and condemnation. Aristophanes, in his comedies, lampooned her mercilessly, depicting her as a brothel keeper and a temptress who manipulated Pericles, implying she was responsible for the Peloponnesian War due to her influence over him. These public lampoons, performed before thousands, would have cemented her scandalous reputation in the popular imagination. The attacks escalated beyond mere caricature. Aspasia was eventually brought to trial on charges of impiety, asabeia, and of keeping a brothel, accusations that carried the death penalty. These charges were almost certainly politically motivated, a desperate attempt to undermine Pericles himself by attacking his most intimate and controversial connection. Imagine the scene in the Athenian courtroom, the stern faces of the judges, the expectant hush of the crowd, and Pericles, the Lion of Athens, reduced to tears as he eloquently and passionately defended the woman he loved. His emotional defense, a rare public display for the famously composed Pericles, ultimately secured her acquittal, but the trial itself was a testament to the dangers she navigated and the intense animosity she provoked. The legal battle would have been exhausting, the air thick with tension and the stench of fear. After Pericles' death from the plague in 429 BC, Aspasia's public profile diminished. While some accounts suggest she later had a relationship with Lysicles, another prominent Athenian general and politician, with whom she had a son, her era of profound influence in the very heart of Athenian power was largely over. The golden light of her unique position faded, leaving behind an enduring legacy of fascination and controversy. Aspasia's legacy remains complex and shrouded in enigma. Was she simply a cynical courtesan who leveraged her charms and intellect for status and survival in a male-dominated world? Or was she a true intellectual pioneer, a proto-feminist who, in her own audacious way, broke down barriers for women in Athenian society, even if only within the confines of the heterosphere? Perhaps she was both, a woman of undeniable genius and courage, whose refusal to conform to the stifling norms of her time led her to be branded a sinner by conventional society. Her story is a powerful example of the tension between societal expectations and individual brilliance, between prescribed roles and the yearning for intellectual and personal freedom. Her sin, from the perspective of Athenian traditionalists, was not merely sexual transgression, but the profound audacity of a woman to be learned, to be vocal, to be influential, and to be free. The echoes of the lively debates in her salon, the scent of olive groves carried on the wind, and the soft light of those evening gatherings where minds met and ideas soared, serve as a haunting reminder of a woman who dared to live a life on her own terms, forever captivating and controversial, a true top entertaining figure of ancient history. And now, we'll move into a completely different world, the world of ancient Greece. Imagine Athens, a city bathed in the golden light of the 5th century BC, a true marvel of the ancient world. The scent of olive groves mingles with the dust from the Acropolis, where the Parthenon, gleaming white and majestic, asserts humanity's triumph and devotion. Down in the Agora, the heart of the city, the air crackles with the lively debates of democracy, the fervent speeches of politicians, the murmur of philosophers, and the eager chatter of merchants. This was the Golden Age, a beacon of intellectual freedom, artistic brilliance, and nascent democracy. Yet for all its enlightened ideals, Athenian society was rigidly patriarchal, its citizen women largely confined to the shadows of the home. It is into this world of stark contrasts that we introduce a woman who defied every convention, whose intellect shone brighter than any jewel, and whose very existence became a scandalous paradox, Aspasia of Miletus. To understand Aspasia, we must first understand the strictures that bound Athenian women. For a freeborn citizen woman, gynaikon, life was lived almost entirely within the confines of the oikos, the household. Her world revolved around managing servants, weaving textiles, raising children, and maintaining the family's honor through her domestic virtue, and, crucially, her silence. She had no legal rights, no political voice, could not own property, and rarely appeared in public unescorted. Her role was to provide legitimate heirs, and her chastity was paramount. To be seen, to be heard, to engage in public discourse was, for a respectable Athenian woman, an unthinkable transgression, a mark of ill repute. But Athens was also a bustling hub of trade and ideas, attracting people from across the Hellenic world. Among these were the metics, resident foreigners, who, though they lacked citizenship rights, often enjoyed greater personal freedoms and opportunities than their Athenian female counterparts. Many metics found roles in commerce, crafts, or, for women, in professions considered unsuitable for citizen wives. And then, there were the hetairai. The term, often translated simply as courtesan or prostitute, does not fully capture their unique and complex position in Athenian society. Unlike the pornai, common prostitutes, hetairai were distinguished by their education, independence, and their involvement in the intellectual and social life of the city. They were companions, skilled conversationalists, musicians, and dancers. They often owned their own property, managed their own finances, and moved freely in public, attending symposia, all-male drinking parties where intellectual discussion was paramount, and engaging with the leading thinkers of their day. They were the only women, aside from priestesses, permitted to interact with Athenian men on an intellectual level. While sexual availability was often part of their profession, it was secondary to their cultivated minds and engaging personalities. It was within this unique liminal space that Aspasia would carve out her extraordinary influence. Aspasia was born in Miletus, an Ionian Greek city known for its vibrant intellectual and philosophical traditions, where women, relative to Athens, enjoyed greater social and intellectual freedom. It's likely she received an excellent education in rhetoric, philosophy, and sophisticated conversation, skills that would have been largely denied to even the wealthiest Athenian citizen woman. She arrived in Athens as a metic, her keen mind and compelling eloquence quickly setting her apart. The precise date of her arrival is unknown, but by the mid-5th century BC, she had captivated the attention of Athens' most powerful man, Pericles. Pericles was the undisputed leader of Athenian democracy, a brilliant orator, a shrewd strategist, and the driving force behind the city's magnificent cultural and architectural flourishing. He was married to a respectable Athenian woman, with whom he had 2 sons, but their relationship, typical of the time, would have been one of domestic duty rather than intellectual partnership. Then, he met Aspasia. What began as a relationship soon blossomed into a profound, undeniable love, an intellectual and emotional bond that astonished and scandalized Athens. Pericles was so devoted to Aspasia that he divorced his citizen wife to live with her. This was a radical act. As a metic, Aspasia could not legally marry an Athenian citizen, so their union was a form of common law marriage, effectively defying the very laws Pericles championed. Imagine the whispers, the raised eyebrows in the agora, as Pericles, the very embodiment of Athenian statesmanship, would publicly greet Aspasia with a kiss whenever he left or returned home, a display of affection unheard of for a man of his standing in public view. The air around them would have been thick with judgment, fascination, and perhaps a hint of grudging admiration for their brazen unconventionality. What was it about Aspasia that captivated the towering intellect of Pericles and so many other leading figures of Athens? It was her mind. Her home in Athens became a vibrant intellectual salon, a magnetic center where the brightest minds of the age gathered. Thinkers like Anaxagoras, the great pre-Socratic philosopher, the playwright Euripides, the historian Herodotus, and even the revered Socrates, were regular attendees. Imagine the scene, the soft light of evening gatherings, illuminating faces engaged in lively, passionate discourse. The scent of olive oil lamps, the clinking of wine cups, the murmur of conversation rising and falling as ideas flowed freely and boundaries were challenged. Aspasia was not merely a hostess, she was a participant, an equal. Accounts suggest her rhetorical skills were legendary. She could engage in complex philosophical debates, dissect political arguments with surgical precision, and articulate her own views with compelling eloquence. Plato, in his dialogue Menexenus, ironically attributes the authorship of Pericles' famous funeral oration to Aspasia, a powerful, if satirical, nod to her legendary rhetorical prowess and profound influence over him. While this is likely an exaggeration, it vividly illustrates the belief that Aspasia was not just Pericles' mistress, but his intellectual partner, his muse, and even his speechwriter, roles unthinkable for any other woman of the era. The very idea of a woman shaping the rhetoric of the leading democrat of Athens, guiding the words that would define Athenian ideals, would have been revolutionary, almost blasphemous, to many traditionalists. Even Socrates, arguably the greatest philosopher of his time, sought out Aspasia. Plato and Xenophon both mention Socrates' admiration for her wisdom. Socrates himself, renowned for his dialectical method, reportedly learned from her, and even recommended his students to her, suggesting she could teach them the art of rhetoric and persuasion. This is perhaps the greatest testament to her intellectual standing, elevating her far beyond the sphere of mere physical companionship. Imagine Socrates with his famously disheveled appearance, sitting intently at her feet, absorbing her wisdom, engaging in lively debates that stretched late into the night, the air filled with the scent of olive groves wafting in from the open windows, and the sheer exhilaration of intellectual discovery. Aspasia's influence extended beyond the elite circle. She was also said to have run a school for other hetairai, teaching them not just the arts of pleasing men, but the intellectual skills, rhetoric, philosophy, and cultured conversation that elevated them above common prostitutes. She was, in essence, a mentor, empowering a select group of women to gain a degree of independence and agency in a society that afforded them very little. This school itself would have been a controversial institution, viewed by traditionalists as a place of moral decay, but for the women who attended, it was a gateway to intellectual and financial freedom. However, Aspasia's unique position, her profound influence, and her unconventional lifestyle inevitably drew fierce criticism and outright hostility. For Athenian society, steeped in its rigid patriarchal norms, her very existence was a challenge, a dangerous anomaly. She was a foreign woman who spoke publicly, engaged intellectually with men as equals, and was sexually unbound. This was profoundly threatening to the established order, particularly to the traditional roles of citizen wives. The sinful label was not just about her sexual freedom, it was about her audacity to transgress every social boundary placed upon women. Her relationship with Pericles made her an irresistible target for his political enemies. Unable to directly attack the popular Pericles, they aimed their venom at his closest and most vulnerable associate, Aspasia. The Athenian comic playwrights, in particular, seized upon her as a subject of ridicule and condemnation. Aristophanes, in his comedies, lampooned her mercilessly, depicting her as a brothel keeper and a temptress who manipulated Pericles, implying she was responsible for the Peloponnesian War due to her influence over him. These public lampoons, performed before thousands, would have cemented her scandalous reputation in the popular imagination. The attacks escalated beyond mere caricature. Aspasia was eventually brought to trial on charges of impiety, asabeia, and of keeping a brothel, accusations that carried the death penalty. These charges were almost certainly politically motivated, a desperate attempt to undermine Pericles himself by attacking his most intimate and controversial connection. Imagine the scene in the Athenian courtroom, the stern faces of the judges, the expectant hush of the crowd, and Pericles, the Lion of Athens, reduced to tears as he eloquently and passionately defended the woman he loved. His emotional defense, a rare public display for the famously composed Pericles, ultimately secured her acquittal, but the trial itself was a testament to the dangers she navigated and the intense animosity she provoked. The legal battle would have been exhausting, the air thick with tension and the stench of fear. After Pericles' death from the plague in 429 BC, Aspasia's public profile diminished. While some accounts suggest she later had a relationship with Lysicles, another prominent Athenian general and politician, with whom she had a son, her era of profound influence in the very heart of Athenian power was largely over. The golden light of her unique position faded, leaving behind an enduring legacy of fascination and controversy. Aspasia's legacy remains complex and shrouded in enigma. Was she simply a cynical courtesan who leveraged her charms and intellect for status and survival in a male-dominated world? Or was she a true intellectual pioneer, a proto-feminist who, in her own audacious way, broke down barriers for women in Athenian society, even if only within the confines of the heterosphere? Perhaps she was both, a woman of undeniable genius and courage, whose refusal to conform to the stifling norms of her time led her to be branded a sinner by conventional society. Her story is a powerful example of the tension between societal expectations and individual brilliance, between prescribed roles and the yearning for intellectual and personal freedom. Her sin, from the perspective of Athenian traditionalists, was not merely sexual transgression, but the profound audacity of a woman to be learned, to be vocal, to be influential, and to be free. The echoes of the lively debates in her salon, the scent of olive groves carried on the wind, and the soft light of those evening gatherings where minds met and ideas soared, serve as a haunting reminder of a woman who dared to live a life on her own terms, forever captivating and controversial, a true top entertaining figure of ancient history. We've just left the sun-drenched empires of antiquity, where philosophers drank hemlock, and cunning kings sought immunity to poison. But as Rome's marble palaces crumbled, giving way to a new age, human nature, with all its ambitions, vulnerabilities, and desires, certainly didn't change. So let's journey now into the medieval world, an era of towering castles and hidden passageways. Behind those damp stone walls, intrigue still simmered. Poison, in fact, remained a favored weapon, perhaps even more insidious in a time less bound by scientific understanding and more by whispered folklore and dark superstition. These were the days of medieval intrigue and mortal brews, where silent death often lurked in the shadows of power. And in this period a profound tension emerged, perhaps even more dramatic than any political plot. With the powerful church now dictating strict moral codes, especially around human desire, how did medieval society truly grapple with the undeniable realities of passion and lust? What happened when sacred vows met irresistible temptation? This constant push and pull between fervent faith and human yearning, between strict doctrine and personal desire, truly shaped the era's most hidden scandals and challenged its very soul. We'll explore all these and more as we enter the world of medieval sin and lust. Imagine yourself in the bustling, vibrant heart of Renaissance Italy, a land ablaze with artistic genius, philosophical rebirth, and astonishing wealth. The air hums with the scent of spices from distant lands, the murmur of Latin and Italian, and the clinking of gold coins changing hands. But beneath this glittering surface, a darker current flowed, particularly in Rome, the very seat of Christendom. For here, in the late 15th and early 16th centuries, a name emerged that would forever be synonymous with ambition, debauchery, and a chilling disregard for sacred vows: the Borgias. This was a family that clawed its way to the pinnacle of power, not through ancient lineage or military conquest alone, but through sheer, audacious will, relentless cunning, and a willingness to commit sins so breathtaking they still shock us today. They were Spanish in origin, outsiders in the fiercely competitive world of Italian city-states, yet they seized the papacy itself, turning the spiritual heart of Europe into their personal fiefdom. The lavishness of their Renaissance courts was legendary, with silks rustling, jewels gleaming, and feasts stretching into the night. But beneath the sacred frescoes of the Vatican, hushed whispers of scandal, political intrigue, and, chillingly, poison followed their every move. To understand the Borgias is to understand the ultimate clash between strict religious doctrine and the persistent, often violent, realities of human desire and unchecked power. At the center of this storm was Rodrigo Borgia, the patriarch, a man of immense charm, towering intellect, and utterly boundless ambition. Born in Valencia, Spain in 1431, he was the nephew of Pope Calixtus III, a connection that opened the doors of the church to him at a young age. He quickly ascended the ecclesiastical ladder, becoming a cardinal at just 25. Even then, long before he donned the papal tiara, Rodrigo lived a life that openly defied the vows of celibacy. He was a man of robust appetites, and his numerous mistresses and illegitimate children were an open secret in Rome. His most enduring relationship was with Vanozza de Catanei, a Roman noblewoman, with whom he had 4 children who would become the infamous core of the Borgia dynasty: Juan, Cesare, Lucrezia, and Geoffrey. Imagine the sheer audacity: a cardinal, living openly with his mistress, raising a family, all while participating in the highest councils of the church. The rustle of cardinals' robes would have been accompanied by the clinking of gold, for Rodrigo was also a master of accumulating wealth, both through legitimate church offices and, allegedly, through less savory means. He was a shrewd businessman, a brilliant administrator, and a captivating orator. He exuded an almost magnetic charisma, drawing people to him, even as his personal life flew in the face of all clerical propriety. The ultimate prize, of course, was the papacy itself. In 1492, upon the death of Pope Innocent VIII, the College of Cardinals convened to elect a new pontiff. The air in the Sistine Chapel would have been thick with tension, the scent of old parchment mingling with the palpable greed of the assembled cardinals. Rodrigo Borgia, now a seasoned politician and the wealthiest cardinal, embarked on a ruthless campaign of bribery and promises. He bought votes with benefices, bishoprics, and even vast sums of money. The election of Pope Alexander VI was a scandal from its very inception, a blatant act of simony, the buying and selling of church offices, that immediately cast a shadow over his pontificate. The hushed whispers of scandal beneath the sacred frescoes of the Sistine Chapel would have been deafening to those who truly understood the corruption at play. Once enthroned, Alexander VI made no pretense of reforming his personal life. His children, particularly Cesare and Lucrezia, were openly acknowledged, and became central to his political strategies. He was a doting father, but his love was intertwined with a ruthless pragmatism. He used his children as pawns in a grand game of power, arranging marriages and alliances to expand Borgia influence across Italy. The lavishness of the papal court under Alexander VI was unprecedented. Feasts were extravagant, entertainments decadent, and the Vatican, the spiritual heart of Catholicism, became a hub of political intrigue and hedonistic excess. The clinking of gold and the murmur of illicit transactions would have been constant companions to the solemn tolling of church bells. Then there was Cesare Borgia, the Pope's second son, a figure of terrifying brilliance and unbridled ambition. Initially, Alexander VI pushed Cesare into an ecclesiastical career, making him a cardinal at just 18. Imagine Cesare, a man born for the battlefield, for command, forced into the rustling silk robes of a cardinal, chafing under the constraints of a life he despised. He was handsome, charismatic, and utterly ruthless, a true Renaissance prince in the mold of Machiavelli's ideal ruler, but the church was too small for Cesare's ambitions. He yearned for military glory, for a temporal kingdom of his own. In a move that shocked Europe, he became the first cardinal in history to publicly resign his office, shedding his red robes for the armor of a condottiero, a mercenary captain. His father, the Pope, then granted him the Duchy of Valentinois in France, and arranged a powerful marriage for him to Charlotte d'Albret, a French noblewoman. Cesare quickly set about carving out a state for himself in central Italy, employing brutal efficiency and military genius. He was a master of deception and terror, using both the sword and, allegedly, poison to eliminate his enemies. The clang of armor and the scent of gunpowder would have followed him across the Italian countryside as he ruthlessly conquered cities and deposed local lords. But it was the whispers of fratricide that truly cemented his chilling reputation. In 1497, Cesare's elder brother, Juan, the Duke of Gandia, was murdered. His body was found floating in the Tiber River, weighted down, with 9 stab wounds. Juan was a dissolute, arrogant man, but his death was a profound shock. The prime suspect, though never proven, was Cesare. Juan stood in Cesare's way, holding military commands and titles that Cesare coveted. Imagine the cold glint in Cesare's eyes, the calculating mind weighing the cost of a brother's life against the prize of absolute power. The hushed whispers of scandal beneath the sacred frescoes of the Vatican now included the chilling accusation of a brother's blood on a cardinal's hands. The Pope himself was devastated by Juan's death, though his grief was quickly overshadowed by his continued support for Cesare's ambitions. Cesare's ruthlessness knew few bounds. He famously lured several of his rebellious captains to a meeting at Senigallia under the guise of reconciliation, only to have them summarily executed. This act of cold betrayal, praised by Machiavelli as a brilliant stroke of statecraft, cemented Cesare's image as a man who would stop at nothing to achieve his goals. The scent of fear, mingled with the metallic tang of blood, would have permeated the air around him. He was a force of nature, a terrifying embodiment of the Borgia will. And then there was Lucrezia Borgia, the Pope's beloved daughter, a figure whose name, like her father's and brothers, became steeped in scandal and dark legend. Lucrezia was undeniably beautiful, intelligent and charming, but her life was, for many years, a tragic pawn in her family's relentless pursuit of power. She was married 3 times, each union meticulously orchestrated by her father and brother for political convenience, and each dissolved with astonishing speed when it no longer served their purpose. Her first marriage at just 13 was to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. When the alliance became inconvenient, Alexander VI forced an annulment, claiming the marriage was unconsummated due to Sforza's impotence, a humiliating public spectacle for her husband. Imagine the heavy silks of her wedding gown, worn for a union that was always destined to be temporary, the whispers of scandal already clinging to her name. Her second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Bedsheets, was initially a love match, and she bore him a son. But when Alfonso's political connections no longer aligned with Cesare's shifting alliances, he became an obstacle. Alfonso was first attacked and wounded in Rome, then, while recovering, was allegedly strangled in his bed by Cesare's men. Imagine Lucrezia's grief, her terror, as her beloved husband was brutally murdered, almost certainly at her own brother's command. The hushed whispers of scandal now included the chilling possibility of murder, a shadow that clung to her. It was during this period between her marriages that the most shocking and persistent allegations against Lucrezia emerged. Accusations of incestuous relationships with both her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her brother, Cesare. These rumors, fueled by their enemies and the sheer audacity of the Borgia court, painted a picture of a family utterly devoid of moral boundaries, engaging in orgies and unspeakable acts within the very walls of the Vatican. The infamous banquet of chestnuts, described by the papal master of ceremonies Johann Burchard, allegedly involved 50 courtesans dancing naked with men, with chestnuts scattered on the floor for them to pick up, and prizes awarded for sexual prowess. While the veracity of Burchard's account is debated, the fact that such a story could even be conceived and widely circulated speaks volumes about the Borgias' reputation for hedonism and moral corruption. The scent of wine and roasted chestnuts would have been thick in the air, mingling with the heavy perfume of illicit pleasures, all beneath the solemn gaze of sacred frescoes. Lucrezia's third and final marriage in 1502 was to Alfonso I d'Este, Duke of Ferrara. This was her escape, her chance to redefine herself. And remarkably, she did. In Ferrara, far from the toxic embrace of her father and brother, Lucrezia underwent a profound transformation. She became a respected duchess, a patron of the arts, a devoted mother, and a pious woman. She fostered a vibrant court, attracting poets, artists, and scholars. She managed the affairs of state with competence and compassion. The woman once branded a symbol of papal debauchery became a beloved and virtuous ruler, leaving behind a legacy of cultural flourishing rather than scandal. It's a compelling sub-story within the Borgia saga, demonstrating that even those born into the deepest shadows of sin could, given the chance, forge a different path. The beauty of sacred frescoes in Ferrara would have contrasted sharply with the alleged sins of her past, now a distant, hushed whisper. The sinful legacy and moral clash of the Borgias is perhaps their most enduring mark on history. Their actions represented a profound and shocking clash between the strict religious doctrine of the Catholic Church and the raw, unbridled realities of human desire, ambition, and political expediency. The Church preached celibacy, piety, and spiritual devotion, yet its very head, Pope Alexander VI, openly flaunted his children and used his sacred office for blatant personal and dynastic gain. The concept of sin, particularly lust, greed, pride, and murder, was central to medieval Christian theology, yet the Borgias seemed to embody them all on a grand imperial scale. Contemporary reactions were a mix of outrage, fear, and a resigned acceptance of the pervasive corruption of the age. Their enemies, of course, fueled the rumors, eager to blacken their names. But even within the Church, many were appalled by the blatant simony, nepotism, and moral decay that characterized Alexander VI's pontificate. The hushed whispers of scandal beneath sacred frescoes were not just gossip, they were a profound indictment of a papacy that seemed to have lost its moral compass. The weight of a confessional silence for many would have been heavy with the unburdened sins of the Borgias. Historians today continue to debate the extent of the Borgias' alleged depravities. Some argue that many of the most sensational accusations, particularly those of incest and widespread poisoning, were exaggerated by their political enemies and later Protestant propagandists, eager to discredit the papacy. It's true that much of our information comes from biased sources. However, even when stripped of the most lurid details, the core narrative remains. The Borgias were a family driven by an insatiable hunger for power, willing to use every tool at their disposal: marriage, military might, cunning diplomacy, and indeed, the insidious threat of poison, to achieve their ends. Their disregard for conventional morality, particularly within the context of their sacred offices, was undeniable. The Borgias remind us that power, whether secular or ecclesiastical, can be a potent corrupter, unleashing the darkest aspects of human nature. Their story is a chilling testament to how sex, sin, and poison were inextricably linked in the cutthroat world of Renaissance Italy, where the pursuit of a dynasty, even a papal one, could lead to acts of breathtaking depravity. They were a family that dared to live beyond the moral boundaries of their time, leaving behind a legacy of infamy that continues to fascinate and horrify, a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and the eternal struggle between the sacred and the profane. All right now, let's step now from the Machiavellian intrigues of the Borgia Vatican, leaving behind the whispers of incest and the clinking of poisoned chalices. We're about to trade the sun-drenched Renaissance courts for the colder, harsher realities of late medieval France, a world where royal power was absolute, reputation was everything, and the discovery of a forbidden liaison could plunge an entire dynasty into chaos. Imagine a towering, formidable figure, King Philip IV of France, known to history as Philip the Fair, and fair he was, in a chillingly austere, almost ethereal way. He was tall, handsome, with piercing blue eyes, and a quiet, almost unnerving demeanor. But beneath that serene exterior beat the heart of a relentless, uncompromising monarch. Philip was obsessed with power, with the glory of France, and with the absolute purity of his Capetian dynasty. He was known for his iron will, his implacable resolve, and his ruthless pursuit of anyone who dared to defy him, whether it was the Knights Templar, the Pope, or, as we're about to discover, members of his own royal family. Philip had 3 strong sons, heirs to his formidable legacy: Louis, the eldest, who would become Louis X, Philip, the middle son, later Philip V, and Charles, the youngest, who would reign as Charles IV. And to secure his dynasty's future, Philip the Fair had arranged prestigious marriages for each of them. Louis was married to Marguerite of Burgundy, a spirited, perhaps headstrong young woman. Philip took Jeanne II of Burgundy as his wife, a more reserved and, as we'll see, politically savvy princess. And Charles was wed to Blanche of Burgundy, Jeanne's younger sister, a striking beauty, though perhaps less cautious than her sibling. On the surface it seemed a perfect family, a gleaming testament to Capetian power and prestige. But beneath that polished facade, a scandal was simmering, a betrayal so profound it would shake the very foundations of the French monarchy and send shockwaves through all of Europe. And at the heart of this unfolding drama stood a specific, ominous landmark in Paris, the Tour de Nesle. This wasn't just any tower. It was a medieval fortress by the Seine, originally part of the city walls, later converted into a royal residence. But by the early 14th century, it had gained a rather notorious reputation. It was a place of whispered assignations, secret meetings, and dark deeds. Its cold stone walls, thick with centuries of secrets, seemed to brood over the river. And soon this tower, once a symbol of royal power, would become infamous as the stage for one of the most shocking and brutal royal scandals in European history. A place where the tension of a royal court on edge would be replaced by the grim finality of medieval punishment. The affairs themselves, like so many forbidden passions, seemed to have begun almost innocently, born perhaps of boredom, youthful recklessness, or a desperate yearning for something more than the stifling etiquette of court life. Royal women, for all their silks and jewels, lived highly restrictive lives, their days dictated by ceremony, their futures by political alliances. For Marguerite of Burgundy, the spirited wife of the future King Louis X, this constrained existence may have chafed. She was a woman of strong desires, perhaps easily tempted by the allure of forbidden passion. Her alleged lover was Philip d'Aunay, a handsome, dashing young knight, a chamberlain in the household of her husband Louis. This position gave him privileged access, allowing for stolen glances in crowded halls, hushed whispers in gilded corridors, and eventually, secret encounters. Blanche of Burgundy, wife of the youngest Prince Charles, was said to be beautiful, perhaps even more so than her sister Marguerite. She too, it was alleged, found solace and passion outside her marriage, with Philip's brother, Gautier d'Aunay. Gautier, like his sibling, was a minor noble but possessed a certain charm and ambition, and, crucially, also held a position within the royal household that allowed him proximity to the princesses. The two d'Aunay brothers, handsome and well-placed, seem to have cultivated a dangerous liaison that intertwined their fates with those of two royal princesses. Jeanne II of Burgundy, Philip's middle daughter-in-law, was the sister of Blanche and the cousin of Marguerite. While she was not accused of direct adultery, she was accused of knowing about the affairs and actively covering for her sister and cousin. This meant she was privy to the secrets, perhaps caught in a web of familial loyalty that would later prove almost as dangerous as direct involvement. Life in the French court, despite its outward splendor, could be incredibly dull for young women of such high status. Their marriages were political contracts, not love matches. Their days were filled with tedious embroidery, formal events, and endless protocol. It's easy to imagine how, amidst this gilded cage, the thrill of a forbidden romance, the dangerous allure of a secret tryst, might have offered an intoxicating escape. The hushed whispers in corridors, the fleeting stolen glances during courtly dances, the nervous excitement of a clandestine meeting in a secluded chamber. These were the subtle beginnings of a scandal that would explode with devastating force. The catalyst for this explosion came from a most unexpected source. Isabella of France, King Philip IV's own daughter, and ironically, a queen in her own right, married to the notoriously ill-suited King Edward II of England. Isabella, later known as the She-Wolf of France for her own ruthless ambition and role in her husband's downfall, was a sharp, observant, and politically astute woman. She possessed her father's steely resolve, perhaps even a greater capacity for cold vengeance. The year was 1313. Isabella was visiting her father in Paris, a diplomatic trip meant to smooth over relations between England and France. As was customary, royal women exchanged gifts. Isabella, being generous, gave each of her sisters-in-law, Marguerite, Blanche and Jeanne, a beautifully embroidered silk purse. A seemingly innocuous gesture, a symbol of sisterly affection and royal etiquette. But later that year, Isabella returned to France for another visit, and it was during this time that her sharp eye caught something amiss. She observed the d'Aunay brothers, Philip and Gautier, wearing identical embroidered purses on their belts. The very same purses, in fact, that she had given to her sisters-in-law. The realization must have struck her with the force of a thunderclap. Why would the prince's chamberlains be wearing gifts intended for the princesses? The implications were immediately chilling. The cold dread that grips the court when a dark secret begins to unravel. The sharp intake of breath as suspicions solidify into certainty. That's the atmosphere that must have descended upon Isabella. Isabella, being Philip the Fair's daughter, knew better than to make a casual accusation. She held her counsel, watching, observing. Some accounts suggest that she specifically arranged for her own lady-in-waiting, a woman named Agnes de Launay, to watch the brothers and princesses more closely. Agnes, perhaps sensing the shift in the royal wind, may have provided direct eyewitness accounts or corroborated Isabella's suspicions. Regardless of the exact sequence, Isabella, confident in her findings, confronted her father with the devastating truth. Imagine Philip IV's reaction. His entire reign had been dedicated to establishing the unassailable power and moral purity of his dynasty. His sons were his legacy, their marriages, the bedrock of France's future. The accusation of infidelity, of such blatant disrespect for the royal line, was not just a personal insult. It was an existential threat to everything he had built. His initial disbelief must have quickly given way to a terrifying, implacable fury. He ordered an immediate, ruthless, and highly secretive investigation. The tension of a royal court on edge would have escalated to a palpable fear, as Philip's grim determination to uncover the truth became clear. No one was safe from his scrutiny. The first to be arrested were, naturally, the Tournai brothers. They were seized and taken immediately for interrogation. Medieval justice was not known for its patience, or its adherence to due process. Under Philip the Fair, whose methods were notoriously harsh, he had, after all, broken the powerful Knights Templar through similar means. Torture was not just a possibility, it was an expected, even standard tool for extracting confessions. The Tournai brothers, stripped of their finery, would have been subjected to the most brutal medieval torture methods. Imagine the strappado, where a victim's hands are tied behind their back, and they are hoisted into the air by a rope attached to their wrists, often with weights tied to their feet, dislocating shoulders. Or the rack, stretching the body to its breaking point, perhaps thumbscrews to crush their fingers. Or the agonizing sensation of the water torture, where vast amounts of water were forced down the throat. The cold stone of the tower, once a place of secret pleasures, now echoed with the screams and groans of men in agony. It didn't take long. Under such unimaginable physical and psychological torment, the Tournai brothers broke. They confessed not only to their own affairs, but, crucially, implicated the princesses. Philip Tournai admitted to his illicit relationship with Marguerite, and Gautier Tournai to his with Blanche. The confessions were detailed, graphic, and, to the medieval mind, obtained under circumstances that proved their veracity. Philip IV's darkest fears had been confirmed. The grim finality of his medieval justice machine was now set in motion. Then came the interrogations of the princesses themselves. They were separated, imprisoned, and subjected to intense pressure. Marguerite, the proud and defiant one, initially resisted, denying everything, perhaps hoping her royal status would protect her. But the weight of the evidence, the certainty of her husband's rage, and the implied threat of what the Tournai brothers had endured, eventually broke her. She confessed to her adultery with Philip Tournai, her words likely forced out through tears and terror. Blanche, perhaps more fragile or more pragmatic, confessed relatively quickly, perhaps hoping to gain some mercy by admitting her transgressions early. The cold stone of their prison cells in the Tour de Nesle, which had once witnessed their secret trysts, now witnessed their desperate confessions. Jeanne, however, stood apart. While she confessed to knowing about the affairs and covering for her sister and cousin, essentially acting as an accomplice to the sin, she vehemently denied committing adultery herself. Her denials were consistent, even under immense pressure, a detail that would later prove critical to her fate. The news of the confessions would have devastated Philip the Fair. His meticulously crafted dynastic image, his vision of an untainted Capetian line lay shattered. His sons' wives, the mothers of his grandchildren and future kings, were proven adulteresses. The blow to his pride and the honor of France was immeasurable. His fury would have been legendary, and his desire for swift, brutal justice, absolute. The punishment meted out to the Tournai brothers was horrific, a chilling spectacle designed to serve as a gruesome warning to anyone who dared to dishonor the crown. They were condemned for treason, the ultimate crime against the king and his lineage. In April 1314, in Pontoise, their execution was a meticulously orchestrated medieval horror show. They were publicly flayed alive, their skins slowly peeled from their bodies. Then, they were castrated, a symbolic emasculation for their sexual transgressions. Their bodies were then dismembered, their limbs hacked off, and they were dragged by horses through the streets, ensuring every citizen witnessed the king's terrible retribution. Finally, their mutilated remains were hanged on a gibbet, left to rot, as a stark reminder of royal justice. Some accounts even say their genitalia were fed to dogs. The crowd would have watched in stunned silence, a mixture of revulsion and awe at the grim finality of such medieval punishment. The screams of the condemned, the stench of blood and burning flesh, the horrified gasps of the onlookers, these sensory details paint a vivid picture of medieval justice at its most brutal. The fate of the princesses, though less overtly gruesome in its immediate execution, was equally grim. Marguerite of Burgundy, the most culpable in Philip IV's eyes, was sent to the dreaded Château Gaillard, a formidable fortress known for its impregnable walls and harsh conditions. Imagine her imprisoned in that cold, damp stone tower, stripped of her royal finery, facing a life of perpetual confinement. Her ultimate end came just over a year later, in 1315. She died in her cell, officially from natural causes, but whispers persist that her death was orchestrated to free her husband, King Louis X, who had succeeded Philip IV after his sudden death, to remarry and produce a legitimate heir. The grim finality of medieval punishment, often unseen by the public, could be just as ruthless. Blanche of Burgundy also faced perpetual imprisonment in Château Gaillard. Her spirit broken, her beauty faded by confinement, she eventually sought solace in religion. She was allowed to enter a nunnery, seemingly accepting a living death within the cloistered walls, where she died years later. Her story is one of despair and the crushing weight of public shame. Jeanne II of Burgundy, however, had a different, more complex fate. Despite her initial imprisonment for complicity, her consistent denial of adultery, coupled with her powerful family connections, her father was the Count of Burgundy and Artois, worked in her favor. Her husband, Philip, remained loyal, and crucially, never publicly accused her of infidelity. This political clout, alongside her lack of direct confession to adultery, saved her. After a long period of imprisonment, she was eventually released and restored to her position as queen when her husband ascended the throne as Philip V. Her story is a testament to the intricate dance of medieval power, where even royal justice could be swayed by political necessity and powerful connections. The aftermath of the Tour de Nesle Affair was catastrophic for Philip IV. His reputation, so carefully cultivated, was irrevocably tarnished. His meticulous dynastic plans lay in ruins. The idea that his sons might not have legitimate heirs, that his bloodline was now suspect, must have been a profound personal and political humiliation. He died suddenly in November 1314, less than a year after the scandal erupted, a death that many attributed to the sheer shock and devastation of the affair. The affair also gave rise to a chilling belief known as the Capetian curse. It was whispered that the moral transgressions of the princesses had brought a divine curse upon the Capetian dynasty. And indeed, the subsequent years seemed to confirm it. Philip IV's three sons all reigned in quick succession: Louis X, Philip V, and Charles IV, but none managed to produce a lasting, legitimate male heir who survived to adulthood. Each died relatively young, leaving only daughters or no surviving children. The unbroken line of Capetian kings that had ruled France for over 300 years came to an abrupt end in 1328. This lack of a clear, universally accepted male succession led directly to a monumental conflict: the 100 Years' War, a devastating struggle for the French throne between the Valois dynasty, who succeeded the Capetians, and the English Plantagenets, who claimed the throne through Isabella of France, ironically, the very woman who exposed the scandal. The lingering chill in the air, the echoes of screams and shattered reputations from the Tour de Nesle, seemed to ripple through generations, profoundly altering the course of European history. The Tour de Nesle itself, the cold stone tower that had witnessed both clandestine pleasure and agonizing torture, became forever stained by its infamy. It was eventually dismantled, but its legend endured, inspiring plays, novels, and poems for centuries to come, a chilling symbol of forbidden acts and the brutal finality of medieval punishment. It remains a stark reminder that even within the most powerful families, under the highest scrutiny, human desire could erupt, leading to betrayals with truly horrific consequences.